Hey, I know you'll fall asleep soon, so before that, I'd appreciate it if you like the video and subscribe, and also let me know what time it is where you're at. Now, our stories begin. Sleep well. The Keddy Cabin Murders. In the early morning hours of April 12th, 1981, a gruesome and still unsolved crime unfolded in a small cabin in Northern California. It happened in Keddy, a quiet, rural community nestled in the Sierra Nevada mountains. The town was once a railroad resort, but by the 1980s, it had faded into a shadow of itself. Cabin 28 was home to Glenna Sue Sharp, a 36-year-old mother of 5 who had moved there after leaving an abusive marriage. She was raising her children alone and had rented the modest cabin just months earlier. On that night, Sue, her 15-year-old son John, and John's friend Donna Wingate were in the cabin. 3 of Sue's younger children were also there, asleep in a back bedroom. The next morning, 14-year-old Sheila Sharp, Sue's daughter, returned home after spending the night with a neighbor. When she stepped into cabin 28, she was met with silence, followed by a scene that would haunt investigators for decades. 3 bodies were found in the living room. Sue, her son John, and Donna Wingate had all been killed sometime during the night. The crime scene was disturbing, but more than anything, it was confusing. The house showed no sign of forced entry. The children in the back bedroom had not been harmed, though they had likely heard something. Tina Sharp, Sue's 12-year-old daughter, was missing. A massive search was launched, but for over 3 years, there was no trace of Tina. Then, in 1984, her remains were discovered more than 50 miles away in the woods. Her cause of death was never determined. The case, from the start, was filled with unanswered questions. Why were only some of the people in the cabin attacked? Why was Tina taken? And why was there so little physical evidence? Investigators quickly had suspects. 2 men, Martin Smart, a neighbor, and his friend John Bo Bubede, were questioned early in the investigation. Martin had made strange comments about hating Sue Sharp and had a history of domestic abuse. His wife, Marilyn, told police that Martin and Bo were acting suspiciously the night of the murders. Despite this, no arrests were made. For years, the case grew cold. Evidence was lost. Interviews were mishandled. And the cabin, once sealed as a crime scene, was eventually torn down. Many believed the investigation had been compromised from the beginning. Then, decades later, new attention came to the case. In 2013, a new sheriff's team reopened the investigation. Old files were re-examined. Evidence that had been overlooked began to resurface, including a recorded confession from a suspect that had somehow never been followed up on. In 2016, a rusty hammer was found in a nearby pond, matching a description of the possible murder weapon. Around the same time, a letter was discovered, written by Martin Smart to his wife. In it, he mentioned having paid the price for what happened and referred to his hatred for Sue. Despite these developments, both Martin Smart and Bo Bubeda had long since passed away, and no one was ever officially charged. The surviving Sharp children grew up without answers. Sheila, the daughter who discovered the crime scene, has continued to speak publicly about the case. She maintains that law enforcement missed key opportunities and possibly protected people involved. The Keddy Cabin murders remain one of California's most baffling cold cases. It is not just the brutality of the crime that lingers, but the silence that followed it. Evidence lost, leads ignored, suspects never fully pursued. Cabin 28 was demolished in 2004. Nothing remains of the structure, but the questions left behind are still very much alive. How could such a crime happen in such a small, quiet place? Why were some spared while others were not? And who was truly responsible for the long night that turned one family's home into a mystery that still hasn't ended? The black-eyed children encounters. They look like ordinary children at first. A boy and a girl, maybe 10 or 12 years old, standing at the edge of your driveway or waiting at the door. Sometimes they're alone. Other times there are two. They're pale, still, dressed in outdated clothing, with speech that's polite, but strange. They ask for help, a phone call, a ride, to be let in. But then you notice their eyes, completely black. No white, no iris, no pupils, just a flat, endless black that swallows the light. And with that realization comes something worse, the sudden, overpowering sense of dread, as if every part of you is screaming that something is wrong. Reports of encounters with so-called black-eyed children began surfacing in the 1990s, though some believe sightings go back much further. The earliest widely known account was written in 1996 by a Texas journalist named Brian Bethel. He described a late-night encounter in a parking lot with two boys who approached his car, asking for a ride. At first, he was tempted to let them in, but then he saw their eyes, and a deep, irrational fear set in. He drove away without looking back. Since then, similar reports have come from across the United States and beyond, always with a few key similarities: children showing up at homes, cars, or hotels late at night, always asking to come in. They speak calmly, often using formal, unnatural language. Witnesses say the children become more insistent over time, almost demanding to be invited inside, but they never force their way in. That's one of the most unsettling details. The children seem to need permission, and those who do allow them in, though those accounts are far rarer, describe unexplained illnesses, strange behavior, or long periods of misfortune afterward. In one case, a couple in Vermont reported a knock at their door during a snowstorm. Two children stood on the porch, heads down, asking to use the phone. Against their better judgment, the couple let them inside. The children sat silently on the couch while the woman made tea. That's when she noticed their eyes. Moments later, the power went out. The children stood up at the same time and said, "Our parents are here." A dark car waited at the end of the driveway, and two tall adults, too far to be seen clearly, took them inside. In the weeks that followed, both husband and wife experienced nosebleeds, worsening health, and what they called a sense of being watched. Skeptics say these stories are urban legend, an internet myth grown from fiction. But many of the reports come from people with nothing to gain, no books to sell, and no interest in the supernatural. Law enforcement has never confirmed an attack, and no child with solid black eyes has ever been found. Still, the stories continue. Some believe the black-eyed children are supernatural, spirits, demons, or omens. Others suggest alien hybrids or government experiments. A few tie them to folklore from other cultures, changelings, trickster spirits, or cursed wanderers that must be invited in before they can cause harm. But no theory explains everything, and no one knows what happens if you invite them in and don't live to tell the story. The encounters are brief, unexplainable, and deeply unsettling. They always start with a knock. The ghosts of Poveglia Island. Just a short boat ride from Venice lies a patch of land few dare speak about. Poveglia Island, cloaked in vines and silence, looks forgotten, but those who know its history believe it was never truly abandoned. Locals won't go near it. Even fishermen steer their boats around it, as if its very soil remembers what happened there. In the 1700s, when the bubonic plague returned to Venice, Poveglia became a quarantine site. At first, infected individuals were sent there in small numbers, but as the death toll rose, the island transformed into a dumping ground for the sick and dying. People were dragged from their homes, some barely symptomatic, and forced onto boats. Once on the island, they were left to die. No treatment, no return. Only the smoke from pyres rising over the lagoon. It is said that more than 100,000 bodies were burned on Poveglia. Some were tossed onto the fires while still breathing, others buried in shallow graves. The island soil is so thick with human remains that even today, bones occasionally wash ashore. Fishermen claim their nets bring up skull fragments. Some refuse to fish near it at all. The plague eventually passed, but the island's use as a place of exile didn't end. In 1922, a psychiatric hospital was opened on Poveglia. Isolated and surrounded by water, it was the perfect place to hide away those considered mentally ill or inconvenient. Patients soon began reporting disturbing experiences. They spoke of voices in the walls, cold spots, and shadowy figures. Some claimed to see people walking through locked doors or hovering near their beds at night. A doctor at the hospital became infamous. Rumors spread that he performed lobotomies and experiments on patients without consent. Over time, he began to suffer strange hallucinations himself. He confided in a nurse that he was hearing voices, seeing things. One night, he climbed the hospital's bell tower and threw himself off. Some believe he was pushed. Others say he survived the fall, only to be dragged screaming into the lagoon by unseen hands. His body was never found. Though the hospital closed decades ago, the bell tower still stands. Locals insist the bell, long removed, sometimes rings by itself. Visitors describe feeling watched. Others claim to hear footsteps echoing through empty halls. Some experience nausea or overwhelming panic the moment they step onto the island. Electronic equipment often fails for no reason. While the government has since sealed off the island to the public, thrill seekers and paranormal investigators continue to sneak in. Some leave disturbed, others refuse to speak of what they witnessed. One visitor described the silence as unnatural, too heavy, too still. Another said it felt as if the island itself was breathing. Skeptics argue the stories are exaggerated, the result of suggestion, history, and imagination. But even they admit that Poveglia feels different. The energy is wrong. The air seems to hum with memory. The truth is that Poveglia saw more suffering and death than most can imagine. Whether haunted or simply scarred, it carries that weight. And perhaps it always will. Some places are forgotten, others are left alone for a reason. The Toxic Lady, Gloria Ramirez, USA, 1994. On the evening of February 19th, 1994, 31-year-old Gloria Ramirez was rushed to the emergency room at Riverside General Hospital in California. She was confused, her heart was racing, and she struggled to breathe. Diagnosed with late-stage cervical cancer just weeks before, her condition had quickly worsened. But what happened next would baffle doctors, scientists, and investigators for decades. As ER staff began treatment, they noticed something strange. Ramirez's body appeared to be coated with an oily sheen, and a fruity, garlic-like odor came from her mouth. A nurse inserted a syringe into her arm to draw blood, and that's when things turned disturbing. The nurse claimed a strange, ammonia-like smell rose from the syringe. Moments later, she fainted. Another staff member began to feel nauseated and passed out. A third collapsed, struggling to breathe. Panic swept through the ER. Hospital staff evacuated the room, moving Ramirez to a separate area while continuing efforts to save her life. Despite their attempts, she was pronounced dead just 45 minutes after arriving. But her death wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. In total, 23 people experienced symptoms, and 5 were hospitalized. The hospital was forced to shut down part of the ER. Those who came into contact with Ramirez described dizziness, fainting, muscle spasms, and a sensation of choking. A hazardous materials team was called in, but no source of contamination could be found. Ramirez's body was sealed in an airtight coffin and placed under heavy security. Speculation ran wild. Some suspected exposure to toxic chemicals or drugs. Others suggested mass hysteria, an unusual psychological reaction causing physical symptoms. But that didn't explain the oily substance, the strange smells, or why only people near Ramirez had been affected. An investigation by California's Department of Health proposed a controversial theory. It suggested Ramirez had used dimethyl sulfoxide, DMSO, a solvent sometimes used as a home remedy for pain. When exposed to oxygen and electrical shocks during emergency treatment, the DMSO could have turned into dimethyl sulfate, a highly toxic chemical. This might have caused the symptoms experienced by the ER staff, but many experts rejected this theory, pointing out flaws in the chemical reactions required. Ramirez's family denied she used DMSO at all. They believed something was being covered up, either a mishandling of her treatment or something far more sinister. Her body was finally buried in an unmarked grave after being held for weeks. No conclusive explanation was ever confirmed. To this day, Gloria Ramirez is remembered not for her illness, but for the fear and mystery surrounding her final moments. Known as the Toxic Lady, her story remains one of the most baffling medical events in modern history. What caused the symptoms? Was it a chemical reaction, a biological anomaly, or something entirely unknown? The case remains unsolved. The truth, like the fumes that filled the ER that night, has long since evaporated, leaving only questions and a chilling reminder that sometimes reality defies explanation. The Vanishing Village of Anjikuni Lake, Canada, 1930. In November 1930, fur trapper Joe LaBelle trudged through the frozen wilderness of northern Canada toward a small Inuit settlement near Anjikuni Lake, a place he had visited before. Familiar with the terrain and the welcoming community, he expected smoke curling from chimneys and the echo of daily life in the snow-covered stillness. But as he approached, something felt deeply wrong. The air was silent. The village stood motionless, its soul seemingly stripped away. What LaBelle found has baffled and haunted investigators and historians ever since. The homes, built of stone and caribou hides, were eerily intact. No signs of struggle, no damage. Fires in the hearths had long since gone cold. Meals were left on tables, partially prepared or half-eaten. Hunting gear, clothing, and supplies, all essential to surviving the harsh Arctic, remained untouched. Even the village's prized rifles leaned quietly against the walls. There was no sign of panic, no tracks in the snow, and most chilling of all, no people. The only living beings in the village were the sled dogs, or what remained of them. They had been tied up and left to starve. Their frozen bodies were found in the snow, untouched by scavengers, as if nature itself avoided the place. Nearby, the village's ancestral graves had been disturbed. The burial mounds were open, and the bodies, carefully wrapped in traditional coverings, were missing. Labelle, shaken and disturbed, made his way to the nearest telegraph station and contacted the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. When officers arrived days later, they confirmed his report. More than 30 villages had vanished without leaving behind a single clue. The RCMP conducted an exhaustive search of the area, stretching across miles of frozen terrain. No footprints, no broken sleds, no abandoned campsites. Nothing was found to suggest where the villagers had gone or why they had left. As news of the vanishing spread, strange stories began to surface. Travelers and trappers claimed they had seen odd lights in the sky above Anjikuni Lake around the time of the disappearance. Pulsing, bluish orbs that hovered silently before vanishing into the clouds. Elders in surrounding communities spoke of spirits that walked the land, angered by unknown trespassers. Others whispered of ancient curses tied to the land, warnings that had been forgotten over generations. The RCMP eventually closed the case with no conclusion, labeling it unsolved and moving on. Skeptics questioned the accuracy of Labelle's report, suggesting that the story had grown in the telling, or that a slow migration might have been misunderstood. However, those who knew the terrain argued back. No group could have moved quietly in freezing temperatures, leaving behind their weapons, clothing, and food. Such an act would have been suicidal. To this day, no concrete evidence has emerged to explain what happened to the people of Anjikuni Lake. No bones have been found, no camps discovered, and no one has claimed descent from the missing villagers. Their homes still stand in ruins, slowly being reclaimed by the wind and snow. The disappearance remains one of Canada's most enduring mysteries. Whether it was the result of a mass migration, environmental catastrophe, something spiritual, or something else entirely, the truth remains buried beneath decades of ice and silence. Some believe the land itself remembers, that the cold winds still carry the voices of those who vanished. Whatever the truth may be, the village at Anjikuni Lake stands as a chilling monument to one of history's strangest and most unsettling disappearances. The disappearance of Maura Murray, New Hampshire, USA, 2004. On February 9th, 2004, Maura Murray, a 21-year-old nursing student from the University of Massachusetts Amherst, vanished under circumstances that continue to baffle investigators and haunt the true crime community. That afternoon, Maura emailed her professors saying there had been a death in the family, a claim that turned out to be false. She then packed her car with clothes, toiletries, and schoolbooks, withdrew cash from an ATM, and bought alcohol at a nearby liquor store. With no clear destination revealed to friends or family, she headed north into the White Mountains of New Hampshire. That night, around 7:27 p.m., Maura's black Saturn crashed into a snowbank along Route 112 near the rural town of Haverhill. A local resident who lived nearby reported hearing the accident and offered help. Maura declined, saying she had already called for roadside assistance, though later records showed no such call was made. The witness left her alone at the scene. Roughly 7 to 10 minutes later, police arrived to find Maura's car locked and abandoned. The windshield was cracked, both airbags had deployed, and a box of wine was spilled inside the vehicle. Her belongings, including a packed bag and printed directions to Vermont, were still in the car. Her cell phone and debit cards, however, were missing. A search of the immediate area, conducted within hours, turned up no footprints in the snow leading away from the scene. Despite extensive searches, ground teams, helicopters, scent tracking dogs, and countless volunteers, no sign of Maura was ever found. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. Theories emerged quickly. Some believed Maura intended to run away and start a new life, pointing to her odd behavior in the days leading up to the trip. Others suspected foul play, citing the short window between her last confirmed sighting and the police's arrival. There were no credible sightings of Maura after the crash, and no evidence to indicate she had been picked up or fled into the woods. As the case gained national attention, online communities became deeply invested in unraveling the mystery. Every detail, her email to professors, the liquor store receipt, the crash site, was scrutinized. Her family remained vocal, insisting she was not suicidal or planning to disappear, and that someone had taken her. In the years since, multiple searches have been conducted based on tips and leads, but none have revealed her whereabouts. The wooded region where she vanished remains vast and unforgiving, a difficult place to search thoroughly. No conclusive evidence has surfaced, no clothing, no remains, no digital trail. Maura's case was one of the first to gain traction through internet sleuthing and true crime forums, setting a precedent for how modern missing persons cases are discussed and dissected publicly. It also highlighted gaps in coordination between law enforcement agencies and raised awareness about adult missing persons investigations. Over 2 decades later, the fate of Maura Murray remains unknown. Her disappearance is still classified as an open case. Her family continues to seek answers, holding on to hope and keeping her memory alive. In the quiet forests of northern New Hampshire, a single crash site marks the last known location of a young woman whose story has become one of America's most enduring modern mysteries. The Silent Twins, June and Jennifer Gibbons, takes place in Wales, UK, 1970s to 1993. June and Jennifer Gibbons were born in 1963 to Caribbean immigrants living in Wales. Identical twins, the girls were inseparable from the start, forming an intense, private bond that shut out the rest of the world. As children, they spoke in a rapid, whispered language only they could understand, a form of idioglossia that even their family struggled to decipher. Though physically healthy, the twins barely spoke to anyone else, earning them the nickname the Silent Twins. At school, they were bullied and ostracized. Teachers reported that the girls sat silently in class, unmoving, eyes downcast. Psychological evaluations revealed no cognitive issues, yet their refusal to communicate with anyone outside of each other baffled professionals. When separated, the twins would become catatonic or fall into depressive states. Efforts to engage them through therapy or intervention failed. Eventually, they were allowed to stay together, though their isolation from the world deepened. At home, June and Jennifer developed a rich imaginary world, writing novels, plays, and diaries filled with strange, often disturbing themes. Their stories featured criminal behavior, violence, and tragic fates. In their teenage years, their writing grew darker, and so did their real lives. The girls began committing petty crimes, shoplifting, vandalism, and even arson. By age 19, they were arrested for a string of offenses and instead of jail, were sent to Broadmoor, a high-security psychiatric hospital in England. The time at Broadmoor lasted over a decade. They were heavily medicated and kept under strict supervision. Doctors noted that while their physical health remained stable, their psychological state showed little improvement. The twins became convinced that one of them had to die for the other to truly live. The belief became a fixation, one fed by their endless, intertwined thoughts and unshakable connection. In 1993, after years of lobbying for their release, it was finally agreed that the twins would be transferred to a lower security facility. On the day of the move, something unexpected happened. Jennifer, previously in good health, collapsed. She was rushed to the hospital, but died of acute myocarditis, an inflammation of the heart, with no clear cause. June later confessed that the twins had made a pact long ago. Jennifer would die, so June could live a normal life. After Jennifer's death, June began to speak openly to others for the first time. She went on to live quietly in the community, occasionally granting interviews, but largely staying out of the spotlight. She never denied the strange pact, nor could she fully explain the depth of the bond they shared. The story of the Silent Twins remains one of the most chilling and tragic cases of psychological enmeshment in modern history. Their connection defied understanding. Two minds so tightly intertwined that one could not survive the freedom of the other. Even now, decades later, June's survival stands as both a mystery and a haunting testament to the invisible threads that bound them. What caused their silence? What kept them so tightly locked within each other's shadow? And why, in the end, did only one walk away? We've come to an end of our stories. If you enjoyed listening, do subscribe, and if you want to be alerted when a new story is uploaded, hit the notification bell. Take care.